I still remember the weight of the envelope in my hand. It wasn't heavy, but it felt as if it was pulling my entire body down, as though the paper inside possessed its own gravity. Just holding it, I felt the air in the room turn viscous, like honey, and every breath became more labored, as if thick smoke, not air, was seeping into my lungs. Mom, Martha, stood opposite me, arms crossed, lips curved into that mocking smile I knew all too well. The smile of someone confident in their righteousness, in their cold, almost businesslike action. Behind her, the silhouette of Tommaso, my brother, flashed by. He was already halfway to the driveway, the keys to his brand-new BMW in his hand, its engine roaring so loudly it seemed meant to herald someone's grand beginning. His, of course, not mine. It was his birthday present. His second one, to be precise. The first one, apparently, was the wrong color. And I was turning 18. A milestone, as adults like to say, the day you officially become your own person. I wasn't expecting fireworks, balloons, or even cake. I had long since learned not to expect anything from my family. But despite that, a tiny, pathetic spark inside me still smoldered, naive, persistent, yearning for just a crumb of warmth. One kind word, a small sign that I mattered, even a little. Instead, I was handed a ticket, a bus ticket, one way to Phoenix. "You're legally an adult now," Mom said, with the same expression people use to deliver a verdict. "It's time to make your own way." I looked at the paper. Plain, gray, faceless, like a coffee receipt. The bus was leaving in the morning. There was no return ticket, just one way, just one destination. My hands trembled as I clutched it, not from fear. Fear was always too understandable. This was something else, a poisonous mix of shame, anger, and disbelief, bubbling inside me like water in a kettle left on the stove. My heart pounded in my temples, loud, almost deafening. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or run away, but I did none of those things. When I looked up again, she was still standing there. The same posture, the same cold gaze. She seemed to even enjoy the sight of me silently burning before her. Tommaso came back inside, passing by the door, and caught my eye. He didn't even try to hide his smirk. "Don't look so surprised," he said, laughing. "At least you got something." I opened my mouth, but the sounds got stuck somewhere in my chest. What could I say? That I'd been working late all last year, in secret, scrounging change to save a little money. That I'd been applying to colleges without their knowledge, knowing in advance there would be no support. That I remembered all those birthdays when they forgot I even existed. No, I just nodded, not even understanding why. Instinct, perhaps, or fear, or maybe just a refusal to give them the pleasure of seeing me break. "Thank you," I said. My voice was even. It didn't tremble. That was my only victory that day. Martha raised her eyebrows slightly, as if surprised by my composure. "You should be grateful for this," she uttered, stretching out the words like a thread. Grateful. That word hung in the air like a stone in my throat. Grateful for being tossed out like trash to the curb. Grateful for the emptiness gifted to me instead of love. I turned around and walked upstairs. My legs moved automatically, as if I were a puppet whose strings were being pulled by someone unseen. My room, the one I'd grown up in, whose walls knew my childhood fears and first dreams, suddenly felt cramped and cold. The posters on the wall seemed absurd, faded remnants of someone else's life. The bed linens, once cozy, now looked cheap and foreign. I sat on the edge of the bed. The ticket was still in my hand, my only proof of existence. The silence was deafening. Tick, tick, tick. The clock on the nightstand counted the seconds, as if preparing to announce the moment of my disappearance. I stared at the wall, and time ceased to exist. My thoughts tangled, fluttered like birds in the dark. Anger, weariness, relief, all mixed into one colorless lump. And somewhere in that viscous silence, something inside me finally snapped. Not with a crack, not with an explosion, just quietly, as if a thin thread holding everything together had been cut. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to leave and never again be the person they knew. In the morning, the sun streamed through the cracked blinds, scattering golden stripes across the floor. The light was soft, almost tender, completely at odds with what I felt inside. I hadn't slept a wink. The suitcase stood by the door, zipped up, stuffed with the bare essentials: clothes, a sketchbook, a diary, my only companions. I had hidden them behind the dresser the night before, like a secret, like a promise. It was strange how calm I felt, as if overnight the grief had burned out completely, leaving only clarity behind. No drama, no hysterics, no goodbyes. No one came to say, "Good luck." No one even checked if I had left. Quietly, almost soundlessly, I went down the stairs, trying not to make the steps creak, as if the house might change its mind at the last moment and not let me go. Martha was sitting at the kitchen island, her elbow resting on the marble surface, a phone in one hand and a cup of black coffee in the other. Her movements were lazy, serene, as if this weren't the day her daughter was leaving home, but just an ordinary Tuesday. The coffee rose to her lips. The phone screen reflected the morning light, and everything in that scene was painfully familiar, ridiculously ordinary. No glance, no pause, no hint of conversation, just an indifferent, "The bus is at 10, muttered between sips. "I know," I replied. She didn't look up from the screen. I think eye contact would have made it all too real, too alive. And she didn't like things that were alive. They demanded participation. Matteo, my father, was already gone. As always, he left early, especially when things got awkward. He had a natural talent for it, vanishing like steam, only reappearing once the storm had passed. I used to get angry. Then I just stopped. Some things are pointless to fight against. Outside, Tommaso was polishing his BMW to a shine, the same car that had brought tears of joy to Martha's eyes 2 years ago. I still remembered how they had laughed then, how the camera in her phone shook with joy, how father slapped him on the back, proud, as if he had built the car himself. The red leather seats, the shiny wheels, the neighbors' exclamations. It was all part of the ritual back then. A celebration. Love expressed in horsepower and gasoline fumes. I never saw Martha cry over me, not once. Not when I received honors at school. Not when I came home in tears after Tommaso got his friends to laugh at me during lunch. Not even when I broke my wrist falling off my bike at 11 and got myself to the emergency room, holding my arm aloft. Martha called it tough love. I called it absence. Growing up in that house was like living between walls of glass. You were seen, but not heard. I existed in the background, transparent, obedient, convenient. Tommaso was the center, the gravity around which everything revolved, loud, confident, perpetually shining. He never asked for permission, he just took what he wanted, and it was accepted as a given. His mistakes were explained away by youth, mine by character. His jokes were wit, mine were inappropriateness. I learned to be quiet like a shadow, learned to read the room to catch the slightest shifts in my mother's mood and dodge them in advance. I learned to smile when I wanted to scream, to listen when no one asked, to pretend I wasn't hurt when I was forgotten. But I was never blind. I saw how she looked at Tommaso, as if he were her justification, proof that life had turned out right after all. And when she looked at me, there was no warmth there, only weary irritation. Sometimes I caught myself thinking, maybe I reminded her of something she had once lost in herself. Or maybe I was just too quiet to deserve attention. The truth was, I had stopped needing their approval long before that day. I had learned to live without it, like a person learns to breathe in thin air. I saved money from odd jobs, took freelance work, drew logos and illustrations late into the night, opened a secret bank account, applied for online courses, found pen pals, just as lonely as I was. I wasn't waiting for a rescue. I knew it wouldn't come. But despite all that, somewhere deep down, a desire remained, not even for love, but for simple acknowledgement that I existed, that I wasn't an empty space between Tommaso and Martha. Instead, a bus ticket and silence. without drama, without a scene, without goodbyes. I took a deeper breath than necessary, just to feel that the air still belonged to me, and looked at the house one last time, the one I had once called my own. As the bus pulled away, smoothly leaving the curb behind, something inside me whispered, "Now it's your turn." The Greyhound bus smelled of old leather, engine oil, and vending machine coffee. The seats creaked under the weight of other people's stories. I settled by the window, clutching my backpack to my chest as if it could protect me. Outside, the road stretched on, long, impassive, like life itself. The ticket was crumpled in the pocket of my hoodie. I didn't take it out. There was no point. Phoenix. A city I knew nothing about, where I was heading without certainty, but with a firm knowledge of one thing. I had nothing left to lose. I didn't cry. Not on the bus, not when the horizon with its jagged teeth of houses appeared in the distance, not when I got off at the station where no one was waiting. But the pain was still there. Not sharp, but deep, like a bruise you can't see but feel with every movement. That pain flared up every time I saw someone hugging their parents or calling their mom on video. When I scrolled through photos of happy families as if looking through a window into someone else's house, I caught myself wondering, what does it feel like to be the one they chose not to let go? I rented a small room above a bakery, an old house. The walls smelled of dough and sugar. The floors creaked with every step. The landlady, a woman named Camilla, kind-hearted and straightforward, didn't ask questions. I paid 2 weeks' rent in advance. I didn't have much money, but it was enough. A few design orders, logos, flyers, album covers kept me afloat. It wasn't brilliant. It didn't look like success. But for the first time, I was earning money with something that belonged only to me. And then there was Adele, a woman who appeared in my life like a soft yet insistent beam of light. She was one of my freelance clients, the founder of a small tech company in Phoenix, who valued my work ethic and once said I had an old soul. Those words sounded like an announcement made in a closed hall, and I remembered them. When I emailed her explaining my situation, she replied almost instantly, "Let's meet." "Tomorrow at 10, she added, and in those words there was no performative warmth, but a practical tone that promised possibility. I chose office attire, the kind that made me stand straighter and feel a bit more confident, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't about to appear as a ghost. Adele, that was her assistant's name, turned out to be everything, businesslike, direct, and a little sharp, yet her words contained goals I shared. Adele wasn't warm. She didn't coddle or fuss over me, but she saw me. Not immediately, not with drama, but she simply saw me and gave me work. Within a week, she entrusted me with the branding for one of her startups, sent edits, and even arranged for one of her drivers to take me to meetings until I could afford my own transport. It felt unreal, as if a door I'd been knocking on my whole life had finally opened. I felt the ice inside me slowly melting. But people from the past don't sleep. They have a way of appearing just when you think you've settled into a new rhythm. Tommaso called first. The message was cold and familiar. "Everyone's home on Saturday. You should be here." Mom repeated the same thing, as if the distance and the recent rejection could be erased by a few words. I stared at the screen for a long time, not out of desire, but out of anger. It wasn't need. It was fury at the realization that they still thought, mistakenly, that I depended on them. What did they expect? That I would crawl back with my hand out? I had a different intention. I wasn't seeking revenge. I didn't want scenes or scandals. I just wanted them to see me not as a crumb that had fallen from their lives, but as a person who had left by her own will and returned, changed. I texted Adele, "Could your driver help me make an impression?" A few seconds later, the reply came, "A limousine," or something like that. "Show up. We'll arrange everything." I smiled for the first time in many days. The plan came together easily. I wasn't going to pretend to be rich. I didn't need labels and empty luxury. I needed a message, clear and cold. I am independent. On Saturday, I bought an outfit from a local boutique, a black fitted jumpsuit with a deep back, which felt like armor, not a sentence to wear. Alma, the shop owner, looked at me as if she saw a kindred spirit and didn't ask unnecessary questions. We completed the look with small gold earrings and nude-colored heels. I laid it all out on the bed and looked at it, marveling at how fabric could change the meaning of a body. These items weren't meant to shout. They were meant to remind them that I was a lost value that could no longer simply be discarded. Adele's driver pulled up to the bakery in a dark gray limousine with tinted windows. The car was subdued and authoritative at the same time. It spoke not of vanity, but of independence. Camilla looked out the window and gave a slight nod. I waved to her and got inside. The interior smelled of leather and a faint floral scent. Soft music played from the speakers, and in that moment, I understood. I wasn't striving to prove anything to anyone. I just wanted to remind them of what they had lost. The limousine entered the neighborhood where I had grown up. Everything looked the same, but I felt that I had changed. I didn't shrink in my seat. I didn't rehearse speeches. I didn't seek recognition. I was ready. The house looked as if everything was frozen in anticipation. White siding, a neat hedge, perfectly trimmed bushes. Tommaso's car still gleamed in the driveway, as if it had never left. Its presence spoke of the same old rules as before. The driver gave me a couple of minutes before opening the door, and I took one last look in the mirror. My makeup was soft but precise, my lips dark red, my gaze sharp as a blade. I texted Tommaso, "Be there in 5." He sent a thumbs-up emoji, and that was it. I pictured them inside. Martha probably criticizing the rolls on the table, Matteo pretending to read something on his phone, and Tommaso, as always, the son in the room. I wondered if they had even set a place for me at the table. Too late, of course, to worry about that. But the thought pierced me, like a brief spark. The limousine slowed and came to a soft stop at the gate. The gravel crunched under the tires, as if time itself was cracking under the weight of the moment. I felt a change in the air, a tense, barely perceptible vibration, as if even space understood that something significant was about to happen. The driver, silent and impeccably polite, walked around the car and opened the door. I took a deep breath, the kind that straightens your back and makes your heart beat slower, lending resolve to your body, and I stepped out. For the first time in my life, they looked at me, not through me, not past me, but directly, truly. Their faces froze, as in an old photograph. Tommaso, usually full of smugness, lost his smirk. Martha narrowed her eyes, and Matteo stood in the doorway, betraying neither surprise nor interest. I didn't smile or wave. I just stood, straight and collected, like a statue finally allowed to come to life. In that moment, I ceased to be a daughter, an inconvenient element in their perfect picture. I became a storm, quiet but inevitable. Silence hung in the yard. Tommaso was the first to break. "Someone's trying hard today," he said, drawing out the words with that lazy sarcasm that always hid his insecurity. But this time, there was something new beneath his voice, a slight unease, an inability to pinpoint the threat. Martha stepped forward, her eyes scanning me from head to toe, her arms crossed, as if donning armor, her lips pressed into a thin line. I knew that expression. It always preceded criticism. "You came in a limousine?" she asked. Her tone was mocking. "Where did you get the money for that?" I allowed myself a slight, almost invisible smile, not defiant, not challenging, just a sign that the question was heard, but no answer would be given. Behind her, Matteo remained in the doorway, his eyes darting between us, as if he were watching a play, not a scene from his own life. I said calmly, without raising my voice, "I didn't come to impress. I came to show you what you let go." Tommaso snorted, but even he didn't dare laugh. The laughter stuck in his throat like an unspoken word. Something changed in the air, in the balance, in the way they looked at me, as if I had grown overnight. And now before them stood not a lost girl, but a woman with wings they hadn't managed to clip. "Dinner's getting cold," Martha muttered, turning towards the door. Well, since you're here, come in. I remained standing, letting her go first. Tommaso muttered something as he passed by. Matteo lingered, met my gaze, and gave an almost imperceptible nod, as if apologizing for everyone. For a few seconds, I stood alone, listening to the wind rustle the trees. I could have turned right now, gotten back in the limousine and disappeared, leaving them to their order and hypocrisy. But I hadn't come for the entrance. I had come for the closure. Entering, I smelled the familiar scent of the house, a mix of Martha's perfume, furniture polish, and a boiled-down, out-of-control perfection. The dining table was, as always, impeccable. Dishes arranged with military precision, a bottle of wine that Tommaso clearly had no right to open, a roast too beautiful to have been cooked by Martha, surely store-bought. Everyone was already seated. "Would anyone like to say grace?" I asked as I sat down. No one answered, and the silence fell like a lid on a coffin. Tommaso was the first to speak. "So, are you rich now?" His smile faltered as I looked him straight in the eye. For the first time, he seemed small to me, still living here, still revolving around their approval like a planet around a long-dead sun. "No," I replied. "I'm not rich, I'm free, and I'm better off without you." Martha snorted. "Please don't pretend we gave you nothing." I slowly tilted my head. "You're right," I said. "You gave me something valuable." She frowned, wary. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, adding quietly, almost confidentially, "A one-way bus ticket." The silence that followed was thick as tar. There was no room for excuses in it. They finally understood that I hadn't come to ask for anything or to prove anything. I had come to draw the line, to become myself in their presence. I slowly stood up, smoothed down my jumpsuit as if shaking off the remnants of others' expectations. "I don't need this dinner, I don't need this house, and I don't need your love." And then, calmly, but with a force that filled the entire room, I added, "I don't need you." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire, leaving behind the smell of ash and cleansing. No one said a word. Not Martha, not Tommaso, not Matteo. The silence hung like such a dense curtain that only my own footsteps and the echoes of my thoughts were audible, and I, without any grand gestures or drawn-out goodbyes, walked to the door, my heels clicking loudly on the polished floor, the sound like the beat of an old record, a reminder of a time that could not be reclaimed. I quietly opened the door and stepped out into the night, where the air smelled cool and promised something new, and the limousine, opening its door without a word, accepted me into its darkened interior. I slipped into the soft twilight of the cabin, and the city lights, scattering behind the tinted glass, seemed like a dance of lights from a foreign life I was only just entering. We moved off, and just like that, I vanished from their frame, as if dissolved, not trying to prove anything to anyone, simply closing the door on the previous world behind me. The ride back was surprisingly calm. The silence in the cabin didn't feel like emptiness. It felt earned, a weight of acceptance and relief simultaneously, and I leaned my forehead against the cold glass, watching the streetlights stretch into long, golden streaks that elongated and got lost on the face of the road. And on this road, I didn't feel like I was fleeing. I wasn't trying to compromise or hide. I wasn't seeking applause or demanding forgiveness. I was simply at peace, and this feeling was so new and yet so necessary that my heart seemed to be learning to breathe differently, softer, without the old tension. I thought about that dinner, about how no one had run after me, shouted or tried to stop me, and I marveled not at the absence of suffering, but at how silence could smell of freedom. Not cold, but warm, like a tangible confirmation that I had taken the right step, that the choice to leave was not an escape, but an act of giving birth to a new part of myself. And I understood with an almost childlike clarity that they were the ones who had lost, not me, that for so many years I had squeezed myself into a form invented for others' convenience, pulled silence over myself so as not to be a bother, made myself smaller, flattened my figure into invisibility. And this whole parable about worthiness, strangely enough, was theirs, not mine. Love is not earned through service and obedience. It is not offered as a reward for silence. It comes to those who are and does not require approval. That one-way bus ticket, which they had tossed to me as a gesture of indifference, turned out to be the beginning that forced me to return to myself on my own terms, to learn what I was like without the shadows of their opinions, how firmly I could stand and how brightly I could burn. And it hadn't even been a month since I'd moved out of the room above the bakery. I was promoted to creative director at Adele's company. The startup gave me responsibility not just for design, but for direction. I had enough savings to move to a small loft in the city center, my own space where I wake up every morning to the sounds of the street, not to Martha's perfumes and the rustle of order. And I painted the walls with my own drawings, furnished it with pieces bought with my first honestly earned money, and in a frame by the entrance door hangs that very ticket. The original ticket to Phoenix, yellowing with time and now turned into a memento, reminding me how all this change began. Do I talk to my family now? Not really. Mateo sent a short message a few weeks later. "Hope you're well." And I didn't reply because I didn't want to return to that small room of expectations. Tommaso tagged me in a story with a passive-aggressive quote about family that always comes back, and I just blocked him. Martha is completely silent, and in that silence I found peace, because to hate them would mean to continue giving them power over my feelings. And I had already granted myself the right to an ending. I stopped waiting for their apologies and justifications, let go of the need for someone to be stunned into recognizing my value. I gave myself closure and the life I deserve. And if you are reading these lines now and wondering if you have the strength to leave behind those who made you live in their shadow and made you feel insignificant, know this: you already have everything you need. You don't need their permission, nor their applause, nor their recognition. You only need yourself. That bus ticket wasn't a punishment. It was a rescue, and the limousine wasn't revenge, but a symbol of a closed circle, a quiet declaration. Look, I see myself. And that turned out to be enough. So no, I didn't get a car. I got something far more important, a chance and the silence I had earned. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever felt like a stranger in your own family, if you were compared, if you were made invisible, remember, you are not alone. And your story does not end where others deemed it appropriate to put a period. Sometimes the greatest gift comes under the mask of rejection, and those who push us away unintentionally make room for us to finally become who we are meant to be. You owe no one your silence, and you owe no one your pain, but you owe yourself a chance to start over. And if you have your own metaphorical ticket, whatever it may look like, know it can become your way out and your guide to freedom, strength, and peace. This is not just my story, it can be yours too. And if it is, I hope you make it.